Now,
All right, thank you for waiting. Welcome to the Monday, May 11th School Board Workshop for Lake County Schools. We'll be going over the 6000s today. Welcome everybody, and we could get started with the moment of silence and Pledge of Allegiance. Is Mr. Matthias here?
negative.
Okay, Mr. Gamble, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence?
All right.
Thank you.
We'll do the moment of silence first. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. All right. Do we have any public input? Are we deferring? Nothing? Okay. So we're on the topics of the review of board policies, Superintendent.
Yeah, so these belong to Mr. Ward and his staff, and so we're going to turn it over to him. I was able to send him some of the policies that you have asked that we review, and if you want to do like last time, we'll just start with those. I'm going to just turn it over to Mr. Ward.
Hey, Madam Chair, board members, and superintendent, thank you for the opportunity to come today and bring these policies in. I've got several staff members with me to assist at any point in time, and might call on them to help explain any of your questions that you may have. But like Superintendent Cornegie recommended, we're going to start with one of the first policies that was sent to me, and that policy is 6152, school fees, and both Dr. Burns and Mark Dodd have pulled that one for review.
I pulled it thinking that we needed to have a discussion with Mark, so why don't we let Mr. Dodd start?
Well, that was very thoughtful of you. Thanks. I had some questions on this one. And the first question has to do with the first paragraph, where it, by the way, this is on page 30 if y'all need a moment to find it. I realized I was jumping in a little quickly there. But the first paragraph mentions that the board may need to levy certain charges to students. My question for this, because you know that sentence has a whole bunch of items listed and then seems to have the end result of non-credit activities. So this levy certain charges, does that apply to only non-credit activities, or does this sentence also apply to those for credit?
I don't know who
Hold
is
on,
answering.
Mark, I'm trying to figure out where you're referring to, Mark. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's the first paragraph, the second line where it begins, the board may need to levy certain charges to students to facilitate the utilization of other appropriate materials for curricular, as well as co-curricular and extracurricular non-credit activities. So are these curricular non-credit activities, or as well as co-curricular and extracurricular non-credit activities? So I guess my question is for the legal folks, is this sentence only applying to non-credit activities, or does it also apply to credit activities?
Mark, I would think it applies to anything under the definition of fees they have here.
So items, so things for credit.
Things for credit or not. The statute that refers to it is 1001.43. And it says the district school board may adopt policies and procedures governing attendance, monitoring, and checks, truancy, fees, fines, and charges imposed on students. And in the 1009 chapter, there's several statutes that talk about waiver of fees or forgiveness of fees. So it's, as far as we can tell, it's contemplated that you have the ability to be able to levy fees for certain activities. What exactly those are, I think, is what Neola's trying to define in this policy. Elizabeth had called down to Palm Beach County, and they apparently had been involved in a lawsuit about this particular issue and ended up resolving it, so didn't get a court ruling. But they had, was it on the first page? Yeah. Theirs is a limitation, the no fee or charge may be required of any student as a condition of attendance and participation for credit. And it goes on to talk about the basic supplies, paper, pens, pencils are responsibility of the parents. But it also refers to being able to charge other fees for different services. And I know we saw in one of these statutes that there were discussion of particularly extracurricular services. So just from looking at it very briefly this afternoon, what it seems to be is that board is allowed to have a policy or procedure to charge fees under certain circumstances that they determine. But there may be some limitation on exactly what they can do. But there are provisions for being able to waive fees if it causes a hardship in certain circumstances. Obviously,
so-
there's a lot more about fees about colleges, so the district school boards involved in fees are fairly limited in the statute.
Right. So my question really focuses on the for credit opportunities, because that's not mentioned anywhere in the sentence. Curricular, as well as co-curricular and extracurricular non-credit activities. So if I'm taking a class, let's say I'm taking culinary, and that's an elective class, but it's still a class I've got to take electives during the school day, and that carries a $50 fee. My question is, does this policy allow somebody to levy such a fee? I don't think that sentence does it, because the student's taking that for credit, not non-credit.
I think.
Like non-credit, to me, it seems like the extracurricular things that are occurring after school, whether they're co-curricular, curricular, or non-credit, or non-curricular, those are things you're doing not for credit, right?
For curricular as well as co-curricular and extracurricular non-credit activities.
Right.
So that would be the non-credit activities is modifying curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular. For those
Right.
activities that you don't get a credit for, that's what the fees are for, and then this
Okay,
policy.
and that's the way I read it too, but I guess I just wanted to get your interpretation on that. So if we've got schools charging fees for credit activities, what governs that?
I think that goes back to the statute, which says that the board can enact a policy or procedures to collect fees.
I think you're allowed to do it. It's just the policy may not be very clear that you're doing that.
Mark, can you elaborate more of which area you're actually looking at on the fees?
I felt like when I read this that it was lacking a actual sort of policy part. Like it's almost like definitions. And then there's no like next step for like a cap on the cost of fees or some movement in that direction, which is what I think Mark was wanting to move towards. Or another method of, collecting fees that is more reasonable for families with multiple kids. And so I thought that's what we were more going to hammer out.
Well, the
Yeah,
next,
well, I think there's going to be more conversation coming when when we see the results of Tom's audit on student fees. I think there's some more dialogue there. But I just wondered if this policy here really kind of limited the collection of fees to non-credit activities, and there's nothing in here that says you can collect a fee for accredited activity.
well, it's interesting, Mark, it gives you a definition of school fees up there in that second paragraph. And then it says in A that school fees include, and then it goes through a list. Second one is charges for field trips made during school hours or after school hours if it's required, if it's a customary part of a class or extracurricular activity. That's not, I'm not sure that's consistent with the first paragraph.
And even the sentence above that saying that it includes use for school property like lab equipment for curriculum, and then if you go above it, it's saying participation in any curricular program. So a chemistry lab, for example. I read that you can include school fees for a chemistry lab because that's lab equipment, but that's usually for credit. So I think it's unclear.
So, Madam Chair, I just want to make sure I understand Mr. Dodd's question. So you believe that because of the way that the language is reading co-curricular and extracurricular, comma, non-credit activities, that the rest of this policy does not apply to credit activities. And you're asking for a clarification. Maybe we should include both credit and non-credit?
Yeah, perhaps so. Because it seemed to me that that for a credited activity, it seemed like you couldn't. To me, you couldn't charge it because it just says that we may levy certain charges for non-credit activities. So if you're an accredited activity, I don't see where this policy gives the the ability to the board to levy a fee.
Okay, well, we certainly can go back and try to clarify that language.
Right. But then the next question I've got on that also seems to suggest in this policy that that the charges shall not exceed the cost. And now I'm looking on page 2 here, just under B5. So in the first sentence there, it says a charge shall not exceed the combined cost of the outside service provided or material used, freight and or handling charges. So, so my question on this one stems from some of the, I guess, the learnings Tom and I have had through the school fees audit. For instance, we met with one school that buys their planners, their agendas for $3.80, but then turns around and sells them to the students for $15. So under this policy, it seems like they could charge not more than $3.80 plus the shipping if there was any additional shipping charge. Am I reading that correctly?
You get that? Go ahead.
Yes. That's consistent with the way I read it.
I believe so.
Okay. And then, similarly, we found there are a lot of schools who sell their own PE uniforms, and they might buy the shirt for $5, turn around and sell it for $10. They take the extra $5 and put it towards buying PE equipment. I guess that would also similarly not be permitted, right? That's because that exceeds the cost of the item that I'm buying. No matter what they're going to use it for, even how worthy of a cause it is. It seems like they can't make a profit and use it elsewhere.
If it's for a fee, I think that's correct. But something like a planner, if it's not required, I think that could be more akin to a fundraiser.
Right, if it's not required, but if they require all students to go buy this planner, then they got to charge the cost for it. They can't make a profit on it,
That's how I read it.
right?
Yeah, that's what it seems to be, yes.
Okay, well, I happen to like that very much, by the way.
That's a big change,
It
actually.
is. So I think this is going to probably start to venture into the realm of if that is the policy, then I think some folks are going to need maybe some extra support when it comes to their budget to look at what they're buying out of their budget that they're using those profits for. When Tom and I sat down with one principal, we learned that that they're supposed to use their school discretionary dollars or some dollars to buy FSA snacks for all the kids, for example. And they were using money generated from other sources like this to kind of offset those costs or to supplement their photocopy budget and other things of the sort. So it seems like, I don't know what sort of supports are in place, Mr. Ward, that you provide to principals on budgeting of the school discretionary accounts, but with this policy, potentially there's a big chunk of revenue that schools have to figure out how to make up.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a good point.
My other question on this one is about what happens in the examples of non-payment fees. I see examples of what happens with fines here. There's a fines here, but when it comes to fees, if you don't pay the fee, For instance, if there's, let's say, a culinary fee of $50 and you don't pay that, what happens? Do you get put on a fines list? Are you excluded from all extracurricular activities until you pay for that? Or I would love to see maybe something addressed there of what happens or what can't happen to the student.
What would you like to happen?
Well, I still struggle with Article 9 of the Constitution that says that we get a free education. So I struggle that any student is having to pay a fee to take a class for credit.
Elizabeth and I had that discussion earlier today.
So I guess, I can't wait to hear your answer on that one. But if there is a fee for a class and a student hasn't paid it, I guess in what it becomes the will of the board at this point to decide this policy, right? I mean,
Well, it seems obvious from reading the statutes and what historically have been done in other counties is that there is some provision for the school district to charge fees, but the statutes seem to leave that pretty up to much whatever the discretion of the district is. Now, we just found out about the lawsuit in Palm Beach late this afternoon, so we're going to take a look at that, see what the issue was, but I wouldn't be surprised if the issue was something along the lines you were just talking about.
okay. So I don't know, other board members, you passionate one way or another as on this section, and how are you feeling about it?
I have to say, I realize that the Constitution states a free education. We know it's not free. I mean, we're all paying taxes, and we all have, property taxes. That's the way that this business is funded. And in regards to, just take band, for instance, I've had a couple of conversations with some of our local band directors, and they have been very heartfelt and expressive about what would happen to their program that is not funded properly, as is nothing in education. And where the statute allows that provision that if they weren't able to do fundraising or have band fees, that their program wouldn't be able to do a majority of the things that they're able to do. And so I worry about us not being able to provide a budget that adequately replaces instruments or fixes instruments or buys new music. I mean, just the cost of music alone, unless they're photocopying, which is against the law also, or just redoing the same music from year to year, which doesn't allow any growth in music or chorus or programs. So I don't know how we continue to supplement a budget without having a fee. And then the other thing that they were very passionate about, or at least the people that I spoke to in regards to this, because I know we brought it up before, I didn't really realize it was going to come up with this policy. I should have seen that coming, but a couple of the band directors I've spoke to have said that they are adamant that no child that cannot pay for the program is stopped from participating, that they put it out there, they have the requirement, but at no point in time would they turn a student away. That if the parent communicates, and it's in the emails, I've gotten the emails as a band parent myself, just if you need help or if you have to talk, let's talk. They provide opportunities for those students to either fundraise or to have their band fees either waived or greatly reduced, typical to our free and reduced lunch program, but that no child is turned away based on their lack of payment or ability to pay. And so I don't know, maybe we need to define that in policy so it's not from school to school, because I've also spoken with Mr. Mock, and I know that he's seen some vast results in the differences from school to school, where some are 0 and some are 250. So there's a huge expanse to these fees. But I will tell you that I don't think that with the funding that we receive, that we can expect our programs to grow and be what they are, and the students have the opportunities that they have without the provisions provided in statute for us to have fees.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that there's a shortfall of adequate funding in education. I wholeheartedly agree with that, and no, I don't think we would expect the students to play the same music every single year. And certainly we know that there's a cost to maintain a program with instruments. I guess maybe, and I don't want to dive too far into the weeds here on one specific program, but I know that at one school, a band fee is listed at $750. By the time you combine just taking that course with all your other electives, you're paying $1,000 worth of fees at the beginning of the year going, oh my gosh, so much for public school. How can I pay $1,000 worth of fees? That doesn't even count the school supplies or, welcome back to school clothes or any of that kind of stuff. there's a huge range in fees that are being charged. So now I guess I looked at that student who's got $1,000 worth of fees. And of course, I mean, they're going to have the classes on their schedule. They're not going to say you can't pay the fee, so you got an empty period. But I guess I look at those kids and I go, are you being put on a fines list because you got $1,000 worth of fees to take courses in a public school? That just doesn't seem right. And I know that there were schools last year that were putting students on the fines list if they didn't pay their fees for a 4-credit class that they got to take. So I guess I guess I'd like to see the kid not put on the fines list. You know, I mean, because they can't maybe pay $750 for band at the beginning of the year. Does that mean they can't go on the field trip next week, or does that mean they can't go to the in-school basketball game, you know, for a cost of $3 because they got to put that $3 towards the $750? I mean, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I wanted to suggest one thing. When we lived in California, and it was all over California, like people in San Jose and more urban areas where we were more Silicon Valley-ish area. So it wasn't just the rich areas, but in California, every school asked for a voluntary $300, and it could be any number, obviously. They asked for a voluntary $300 donation at the beginning of the school year. And then you didn't pay for anything. You didn't pay for field trips. You didn't pay for band. You didn't pay for art supplies. You didn't bring in pencils. They bought all of that. They bought it with the money they got. Their goal was to get 100% of people to pay something, but that it could be on your level. So if you have multiple kids, you might pay less. One year I paid less because we were like, you know, losing jobs and in the middle of moving or whatever, you know, I was pregnant. But I'm just saying, like, the voluntary fees is a middle ground. That's a possibility. But maybe we should wait and hold this policy, I don't know, aside or bring it back. But maybe we should wait on this policy for Mr. Mox, because I didn't know it was that extensive. Like $750 fees is a lot.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say too, is I think Mr. Mock's presentation would be pretty informative before we make any decisions on this policy. I agree, Christy.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, I think that sounds like a smart move, because I think we'll be able to have some more in-depth conversation once we see the results of his audits and understand just how varied the fees are throughout the district, and maybe we may be able to come to some conclusions about some reasonable practices. Okay.
Mark,
Yeah, maybe we can workshop it and, I don't know, have some input from, I don't know, do we have a band committee or a clubs committee? I don't know.
You're
I don't
the
want to
chair,
take
you
all
make the
band fees
committees.
away and then have a band director who,
Oh.
like, they didn't have a voice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
but Chair, I was going to say, Mark, could you get us a detail of what some of that money is used for, the one that you're talking about 750 or 675, whatever it was? Can you
I
get
don't
us
know
a
the
detailed
breakdown on
list
that.
of it?
No, I don't have the breakdown on that specific $750. You know, I guess if I'm thinking about you know, my own students in band, I kind of know where that money goes. But I think each school does things a little bit differently as to what they include in their fee and what they don't.
That'll all be a part of Mr. Bach's presentation. If I'm wrong, I know Tom's on here. You can correct us, but I know him and I have spoke briefly, but they do tell him a lot of the things that these fees are generated for. And he's had lots of conversation, I think, with lots of people.
You know, I've had a lot of conversations, but I don't think I've documented it all down as far as what they're using their fees for. But it varies. It just varies based on how much they want to put into their program and what obviously they're getting out. Number of concerts or number of programs that they're planning on putting on, number of music that they're buying. As Mark said, that's very expensive to buy music, and a lot of them change it from year to year. So every year they're buying new music, and they need to get the copyrights for that. So I don't have the details on each and every program, I was more just collecting how much they were spending or how much they were charging in student fees.
I think it would be pretty advantageous then. The people that I've spoke to have been able to speak to their fees that they're charging. And I know this says curricular, co-curricular. Is this, there's sports too that are a part of this conversation. This is all fees that we're talking about. And I know that different programs have different levels of competition too. And so I also think we have to consider that. How much is a program going above and beyond what we would consider an elective? I know I have 2 girls that have collegiate aspirations in regards to sports. And so when you say $750, I see, wow, that's a huge savings to what I pay outside of school as an elective for them. So I think it would be pretty beneficial. I see you shaking your head, Mr. Mock, because he has a son in college baseball. He knows how expensive that is. So I think it'd be really important for us to consider the programs that these people are offering, because we have some coaches out there that are magnificent, that are really doing things for kids that are going to be avenues to college or to other things, to other areas that are knowledgeable. And again, I think I heard Dr. Burns say, I don't want them to feel like they didn't have a voice at this table either, because it's really easy for us to sit over here and say, that's a lot of money, or this is for that. But when they can constitute, this is the program, this is what I'm offering, this is what kids get out of it, that's important to consider as well.
Yeah, and I'm not so much focused on what's occurring after school, if they're participating in extracurricular sports or clubs or that kind of thing. I'm focusing more on, I'm taking the class just during the school day, and the class during the school day, I'm paying basically the equivalent of college tuition to go to a K-12 school.
Right.
To me, that doesn't sit right. There's got to be something a little in a better balance. But yeah, I just found the whole thing very eye-opening. I guess I was more interested in what happens to the kids when they don't pay it and what the repercussions are. Because I know that, it seems to make their life miserable once they're on the fines list, and then they're stuck till they've paid $1,000 potentially for all these elective classes. But I'd feel comfortable if we think we might be able to address this one before the start of school, because I think when August rolls around and people have already put their fees out, it's kind of hard to,
That's true.
to backpedal on that. Then you're kind of waiting a whole nother year to come to some resolution.
Where is it on your schedule, Mr. Mock? Or when do you expect it to be completed?
The draft is done. I think we're ready to get it on a workshop, right, Mark?
Did you need to send it through the audit committee first?
Oh, yeah, that's right. And I don't even have it on the audit committee because we have a limited time in June. So probably need to have another audit committee meeting in July and get it on there.
Could you put it on June's at all to get it to us before then?
I can try. It's we're going to go over the CAFR, and that's probably going to take a big portion of the meeting's time.
Is the CAFR, I know the CAFR's big. Is it time dependent?
Yeah, because we need, it is a big part of what the audit committee, as we get down to the charter today. I mean, that's a big part of what the audit committee is there for is.
Oh, I'm not suggesting they don't do it. I was just suggesting that maybe we could put this shorter one as a first one, and then they could dig into the CAFR.
Yeah. I'll just try to squeeze the audit, the student fees in there. I'm gonna guess they don't have a lot of questions on that, but you never know.
Madam Chair, as you know, we submit our audit along with our CAFR to the Governmental Accounting Agency, and they review that and they award a letter on that based on that. That already went out in January, February. I believe it was February. No, actually, I think it was January. And then also, we've already submitted all of the stuff to the federal government for our federal programs and everything. So there's nothing time sensitive that needs approval for the CAFR. It can wait until July.
Oh, well, that's great then. Okay. So does that work, Mr. Mock? For you?
I'll look at it. I think we can get the student fee on there. The only other thing that I had was the presentation for the internal audit self-assessment that we just completed. And I wanted to get that done into the board as well. So I'll put that on there.
Great, thank you.
I don't think there'll be a problem.
Perfect. All right. Are we ready to move on to the next item?
Okay. For the next item, I actually wanted to bring this one up. It is on page 33. It is policy number 6220, budget preparation. And just wanted to, it went in the original that the budget recommended by the superintendent shall include budgeted reserves and assigned and unassigned funds for at least 4%. And I think we should make that at least 3%. We're not able to meet that at this point in time. And I don't see that being met in the near future. And I just don't, I think a 3%, which is required by the state, would be better.
Scott, the 3% also is the threshold that the state gives us, that's the lowest it can go, isn't it?
That is correct. Yes.
What was the policy, Scott?
6220 on page 30. So that's the budget preparation.
So this would be kind of a big shift for us, because I think for I don't know how many years we've operated at the goal of 4%. So that wouldn't be the goal anymore. 3% would be.
Well, and that's the current language is it's a goal for 4%, and that goal for 4% could still exist. This is just saying that when the superintendent presents the tentative budget to the board, it has to be at least 4%. So it actually took away flexibility that we currently have. So to me, putting it back at 3% gives us the flexibility to go below 4%, but at the same time, it keeps us at least at that state required 3% level.
It keeps us from breaking our own policy.
True.
But wait, didn't we get rid of the 4% policy? Isn't this where that goes?
We're going to talk about that one next.
Okay.
Oh, actually, the next one is the one. The next one really speaks more to dipping below the 4%. It actually got moved to 5%, but I'm fine with it staying at 4. I'd like for it to be 5, but we can talk about that next.
Okay.
I would like to hear Bill's thoughts on this one when he's able to next time we talk about this policy. I know that the budget has been quite a passion for his for a number of years, and he's kind of the expert in that wheelhouse. So I guess I'm kind of making a note to myself. So when we go to approve this one, I'd like to hear his thoughts too.
Well, this wouldn't change the 4% that the board would targets for us to get in our budget. What this would do is it would allow the superintendent to provide a budget to you guys in the tentative budget level that's below the 4%, which is exactly what we've done in the last probably 4 years plus. So it's more like what we've been doing in practice versus what we'd like to be able to. If you were going to put this policy in at this point in this year, we would be cutting programs and cutting staff members before we got to present that budget to the board members, because she would only be allowed to present a budget that was at least 4% reserves.
And right now, that's kind of far and few between.
True.
Right, Scott?
Yes, sir. Okay. Any other comments?
Nope.
The next one is on page 34. It is 6233 district budget. And I had a comment on that, and also Dr. Burns and Mr. Dodd both had a question about that. So my only comment is it did move up to 5%, and I would agree with a 5% increase, but I think that it needs to say, actually, I think the way that this is written, I'd like it stricken completely out, because anytime we drop or fall below 5% or 4%, it would kick in the district having to go in and make basically projected budget cuts. But if that's the will of the board, we can start that process, but that's not the process that we've had in the past.
Well, I
Wait,
think,
I have 634 as the use of discretionary lottery funds. Which one are you looking at?
6233, page 30, it's page 34, I'm sorry.
Oh, I got it. Okay.
Page 34, 6233.
Okay.
if we strike this totally out, then disregard this comment, but on the last line, I believe that should be plan instead of plant.
I agree. Yeah, this is a typo, we missed.
So what are you asking to do? To strike number 1?
Yeah, I would recommend striking number 1, which would require that it says anytime the portion of general fund ending fund balance not classified as restricted, committed, or non-spendable in the district's approved operating budget is projected to fall below 5% of projected general fund revenues during the current fiscal year, the superintendent shall develop and submit to the board for approval a plan to restore the ending fund balance to 5% of projected fund revenues, which is more than what currently the target is 4%. And we're allowed to go below 4% as long as we don't dip below 3% without any triggering any kind of required plan. So I think if you strike it and we follow what we've been following, and that is we target 4%, but if we're below 4%, we have those conversations, but there's no specific plan moving forward. Again, these are your policies. That's just my recommendation.
Any repercussions from it?
Well, my question is, where is the 4% in policy? Like, because we had it as I don't know what, that was our fund balance, our recommended fund balance, right?
Right.
So
And
where in your policies does it say 4% anywhere?
I don't think it's in here, and I think it needs to be added that way. And then when we can do that here, we can add that 4% language that we currently have.
Oh, okay, I'm
And
fine
I
with
would
that.
recommend that. So
Any other?
Where did the
Board members?
5% come from?
I
Is that
believe
that?
this is a policy that Neola put in,
Okay,
and it's probably somewhat other districts' policy.
okay.
So this is a real challenge, especially given Lake County's per pupil funding level, right? That we know that we're at the bottom of per pupil funding, and therefore we seem to be at the bottom of fund reserve balance. I guess it makes me a little nervous to say that I guess I want to make sure that that we're going to be striving for more than 3%, even if that's not always practical. But at least we've got that idea. Because I mean, if you're only trying to make 3%, and you get no wiggle room for unexpected rainy days.
But didn't you say, Mr. Ward, you were going to put the 4% in here? You're going to strike number 1 and then put the 4% in from the language that we had? Did you
Yeah,
say that?
That would be my recommendation, is to put the current language back in there, that we would continue to strive for the 4%, at least.
So if we are striving for the 4% and we're dropping below that, I guess I'm struggling to understand the why would we strike number 1 then? Why wouldn't we want to continue to receive a plan of how to get there?
Again, this is board members' policy, so if that's what the board would like to see in their policy, we definitely can put it in there or keep it in there.
Well, I don't think we understand.
Yeah,
I don't think we get what, like, why is what we wrote previously better than just changing the number 1 to 4%?
Just because it's going to we would be providing a plan to you, which is not a bad idea. We'd have to provide a plan to you, but right now we would be constantly presenting a plan to you because we would be constantly staying under 5% unless if we took some drastic actions in our budget to reduce enough expenditures. And you're not going to reduce 2% of your expenditures without impacting schools, programs, and employees. So if that's the desire of the board, we definitely can do that. But I just kind of picked up that wasn't the desire of our board.
Okay, so maybe the any time is not the best language. That maybe we only want to hear this proposal or plan once a year, and then we say, okay, well, we don't want to make those cuts to programs. So we see the impact of what it would take to get to 4%. And we're willing to stay on course at the 3 or 3.5 or whatever it is. So maybe if we scratch the any time, then superintendent's not doing that every week, right? Because that's not the intention here. Maybe we're just looking at that as part of our annual budgeting process. And that's kind of a financial update of the health condition of the district. And we say, well, this is what it would take to get to 4%. And then we choose to act on it or not at that point. Just one side.
As part of our annual budgeting process, we definitely could create a plan and present it to the board as to how we could obtain that 5% or 4% or whatever the board chooses.
Right? Doesn't that seem a lot more reasonable than any time? Right?
Yeah, I like that idea. I like Mark's idea.
Okay, so we can adapt that language to, during the budget process. We can do that.
Because that might give us a little more flexibility in ideas. Like maybe we'll be able to find something more.
But Scott,
Yes,
Mark brought up a good thing as well. If we're changing this to 4 and the bottom line is 3, as we said earlier, is it possible we could make that instead 3.25? That way it gives us a little leverage of not being right there at the bottom? Or is that beyond?
3 is statute, right?
3 is the
Yeah,
lowest
3.
you can go.
right. 3, when we get below 3, then we're already speaking to the Commissioner of Education. We've already have to develop a plan by statute.
Right.
That is correct. So if the board wanted to do a plan after 5, or if the board wanted to move back to the 4% level, and then when we dip below the 4%, come up with a plan to present to the board, that's possible. Or
But let me just ask a clarifying question then, Mr. Ward, because I don't know if it's even just that you present the plan to the board. That number 1 says the general fund revenue, blah, blah, blah. The superintendent shall develop and submit to the board for approval a plan to restore the ending fund balance to 5%. So is it suggesting that you would submit a plan to us that would restore our general fund balance to 5%, including the cuts that we would have to approve? Or would we have to say we're going to reject that plan and we're okay with going below 5%? But you're going to have to bring a plan forward that would make our fund balance 5% for
That
us
is-
to approve.
That is correct. And what I would do in that situation is I would go through and list out several alternatives for the board to say, this is what you would cut, and this is what the result would be. And I would bring in things in so that you guys could determine how you could get back to a 5% or a 4% level, whatever you desire.
So now it makes sense why you said to me, I was kind of with Dr. Burns, I wasn't really understanding what the difference was, but it's not just presenting a plan, it's actually giving us a plan that will bring our fund balance back to 5, but will restore the 5%. We've been trying to get above the 3% threshold, or stay above, I guess I should say, the 3% threshold as long as I can remember. And so if we have to approve a plan that would then take us above 5%, there would be lots of cuts to programs and student funding, correct?
That is correct.
Well,
Yeah, the
I would
language
say,
would have to be so that we don't have to approve it, that
Right.
we could just say, okay, that was okay, now we see what it would take to get there. We're not willing to make those sacrifices at this time, so we're going to just hold on with what we've got. You know, I guess I want to make sure that this policy gives us that decision opportunity.
Hey,
Okay,
so we want to see that. We haven't seen that before, where if you guys really wanted to bring your fund balance to 5%, this is what we would suggest.
And I'd like to see that. Like we always hear, if we do this, it's going to hurt kids. But honestly, it'd be nice to have it tangible, so you could be like, I can't do that because, I'm really excited about the program that I think is going to really help kids go to college, or whatever the thing. I think this is a very valuable program. We could actually think things through. I just think it would lead to more conversation, and more conversation can lead to.
Mr. Campbell has his hand raised.
I think, first of all, we have to go back to the prior policy and establish what we want the line item to be there. And as Mr. Dodd said, he'd like to hear Mr. Mathias's input on that as well. Before we go to this and say we're going to do 5%, if we're going to do 3 or 3.25%, it's kind of foolish for us to put a 5%. 4% would be the next thing. If we was tell Mr. Ward and the superintendent, bring us back and show us how we can get to 4%, and they came here and showed us in the budget process how many positions would have to be cut, how many this, that, and the other, we would be overwhelmed. And I don't think that's something we're wanting to look at now, but I think this 5% is way out of line right now.
I agree, it's too high. I would think 4% or.
Okay.
Mr. Dodd, did you want to
Shake your
speak?
head,
No, I agree. 5% is too much. And that's not realistic. We're not going to go for that. We're not even at 4% yet. Why are we striving for 5?
Right.
It's got to be incremental steps here.
The number would be so significant. It would
It would be silly. I think there could be a useful exercise, or we could make it silly.
Okay. I will work on this language and get it back to you guys.
Thank you. All right, what's our next?
The next one is on page 36. It's policy 6234, and that is Dr. Burns, and that's discretionary lottery funds.
Oh, that one. This policy, do we have to even have it? I mean, I just feel, okay, here, you know what? I'm just gonna read y'all my comments from last night. Everyone always loves my comments. 6234. This isn't true. Do we have to have this policy? It should say for 30 years, we have been taking your lottery money and giving it to schools with one hand while taking away the same amount with the other hand. There is and never has been an increase in education funding due to lottery. It is a bait and switch. It also perpetuates the myth. So
So moved.
can we just get rid of that policy that even talks about it helping us?
There's no statute.
I don't know of any statute requiring that we have a policy for this, so I think it's up to the board's discretion.
Strike it. I strike. Strike it whenever you can strike one, strike one.
I like Christie's language though.
I do too, yeah.
I was a little miffed by this one. All right, moving on. That was easy.
Next. The next one is on page 38. It is policy number 6320, purchasing commodities. And Elizabeth Turner had several concerns about this policy, and also Dr. Burns. So,
Well, my question as I read it through was, I don't know the previous policy for procurement. So I just wanted you to kind of give me an overview of how does this policy allow us, or how is it different? And then how does it make it so that in the future we can have like more effective, like, is it helpful? Have we reduced, paperwork in any way? What has changed between this policy and the way we did it? And what could change with this policy?
But I believe most of the things that are changing in this policy is just clarifying some older language. If you look at our current policy, there's some conflicts in it, and some of the language is difficult to understand. And then I believe a lot of it is just, a lot of it is dictated by statute. So a lot of it is just basically saying the same thing the statute's saying. But then the statute gives the board some discretion and the power that it gives to the superintendent, and that's what this policy really defines.
Okay.
Maybe Elizabeth can speak to a lot more and also address some of her concerns and help you better understand it.
Sure. Well, first of all, some of my concerns were more of a clerical type of concern, so I have passed those along to Mr. Ward. Don't need to go through those now, just Neola citing statutes that no longer exist, so I've provided the correct statutory citations, things like that. So that part's not really important right now. One question that is more to address with Neola, not necessarily you all, is that our current purchasing policy is not organized very well, in my opinion. It doesn't have very clear outlines for what processes you use for different types of competitive solicitation. So if you look on page 39 in the definition section, it defines the different types of competitive solicitations. There's invitations to bid, requests for proposal, invitations to negotiate, and our current policy doesn't lay it out in a very clear manner, like step by step. So that's one of the things that I think this is going to attempt to do. My biggest concern, I guess, right now is that some clarifying language that it doesn't seem to address everything. There's policies for, or procedures for invitations to bid, but not necessarily for the other two types, request to produce, or I'm sorry, request to produce, that's litigation. Requests for proposals and invitations to negotiate. So that's something that I've spoken with Mr. Ward. We're gonna get with the Neola folks to clarify. The main thing right now that our policy, in my opinion, is personally lacking is clarity as to the superintendent's purchasing authority. In our current policy, some places it says that she can authorize purchases up to $50,000. Other places it says for $20,000. And there's some conflicting categories for those thresholds. And so one of the things that this policy is going to do is clarify that. And the way it's drafted now, if you look on page 41, under the exception to competitive bidding requirements, subparagraph B, it says that the superintendent is authorized to purchase commodities and contractual services where the total amount does not exceed $50,000 and does not exceed the applicable appropriation to the budget. So that is really clarifying that language. And the 50,000, that comes from statute. You can deviate from that, but that 50 is the threshold that the statute provides.
Okay.
That takes away from the 20,000 you were talking about.
Correct. This would just make it,
Just
the way
one-
that it's drafted, it would be a $50,000 across the board.
Okay.
I always thought it was $50,000 across the board, so I'm definitely fine with that.
It was 20. I believe we increased the threshold because of the statute a while ago, so.
Okay, so it was probably a
Well,
clerical
and it was,
error.
I think it was unclear in the policy because it still said for certain categories that it was 50, and then for certain things it was 20, and that caused a lot of confusion with procurement, with other departments that submit contracts for review. So this, I think, is just gonna make it nice and tidy that it's $50,000. But the other question is, we have certain contracts, like our articulation agreements with the colleges for dual enrollment, that have $0 attached, but there's still requirements that are imposed on the board, and that was a question of, you know, $0 is less than 50,000. Is that something that you all would like to authorize her to be able to sign so that those kind of contracts don't have to come before you?
I like the articulation agreements. Because it shows me who we're working with, but if it's a ton of paperwork, we can do away with it.
It's just it's a matter of who is authorized to go ahead and execute. You're essentially saying that the superintendent has authority up to $50,000 for any kind of contracts, regardless of the topic or subject. If the requirement is $50 in the contract, that's less than 50,000, even though it may not have any substantial financial impact. Right now, the board, under some of those categories, would have to sign the contract and approve it at a school board meeting. The goal here is to maximize the authority that the superintendent has under the statute to eliminate some of the administrative paperwork that's connected with it and the delay that's often caused when you have to put it on a school board agenda.
And most of those agreements either don't change from year to year, or we've worked with the departments to make templates. So for example, we have the students in the health sciences programs that go out and do like the nursing in hospitals, things like that. Those are clinical service agreements that we've made a template. They are the exact same every time, but for the name of the facility that the students are working in. And so they're very standardized already. There's $0 attached, and so sometimes there's a delay because, as Mr. Johnson said, they have to come. This month you have one school board meeting, and so because it has to be submitted 2 weeks in advance, it's just sometimes that administrative detail kind of bogs down. So that was the logic behind that one.
Board, ideas, thoughts? Welcome back, Mr. Mathias.
If it's within her statutory, I think I heard Mr. Johnson say that is her right in statute to make those decisions. It's just taking off a layer of bureaucracy. It seems logical to me.
Here, here.
All right, let's do it.
The only other thing, the major thing in this policy was about emergency purchases, which of course are on our thoughts right now. If you go to page 42, about halfway down, it's paragraph J. There there's a provision for emergency policies there, and then another provision on page 43, paragraph B. Right now, it's saying that the superintendent makes a written determination in the cases of an emergency that a purchase needs to be made, and the board may proceed with the procurement. And I discussed this one with Mr. Ward this afternoon. The problem with that, the way it's drafted now, is then that means that you can't do what we've been doing now. The board has to come together to make that procurement. And so it was our recommendation that we change the word board there to the superintendent may proceed with the procurement. Again, only for emergency situations, but then that way that ties up that bureaucracy in the case of an emergency. Okay.
Yes.
What could we reject what we already have established and just put that in its place and that takes care of it?
We have an emergency powers policy that I'm not sure, since it's not in the finances, because that policy says she can suspend or waive any policy, not just a financial one.
Okay.
So that would be something that we could do, is add that same emergency policies, that she could suspend any policy, and that would take care of that as well. It's just, that wasn't in the procurement section, so
Yeah, I don't think we want to put it in procurement. I don't think that's where it belongs at all.
it would have its own. And then on that other page, like I said, 43B, it currently does not have a reporting requirement. So our emergency policy requires the superintendent to let you all know, here are the contracts that I've executed on behalf of the board during this emergency. This policy does not have that reporting requirement, so it's up to you to decide whether you'd like to add that in, or just have that be an informal policy procedure.
You're saying to have the superintendent bring to us the purchases she made prior
Yes,
to
sir.
the next board meeting, just like she's been doing.
Correct, that's in our current emergency policy.
That needs to be
That's not in
there.
here?
That needs to be in there.
Okay,
Yeah, I like that.
I agree.
that's all I've got on this one.
Okay, any more comments on the purchasing commodities board policy? Are we ready to go to the next one?
I think we're ready.
Okay, so the next one is the, on page 51, it is policy number 6324. It is the cone of silence policy. And again, it was Elizabeth Turner who had a comment about it.
This one, so our current procedure is that when a bid goes out, there's the cone of silence so that the prospective vendor cannot talk to staff members of the district. It exempts the procurement staff if they have questions, but staff members, and it says board members. But we oftentimes have these selection committees that have members of the public that sit on these committees. And so after discussing this with procurement, we thought it was appropriate to include those general public committee members in the cone of silence to prohibit that communication before a bid is awarded.
Totally makes sense.
Very good.
Makes sense.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. You ready to go to the next one?
Yep.
Yes.
Press on.
Okay, so the next one is page number 62. It's policy number 6450, local purchasing. And again, it's Elizabeth Turner.
Just got lots of talking today. This one, just gonna get into my notes, 6450. We just had a couple adjustments. The first thing, the first paragraph, we don't actually define a local business, so we thought it would be a good idea to maybe add a definition of local business for purposes of this policy. It currently says the board prefers to purchase from businesses located in Lake County local businesses, but didn't know if there was a further definition to bring clarity.
I like that.
The intent was, in local preference, for them to have a business here and to employ. So if you wanted to tie some language, now it's over here on the back side,
Okay.
that they have to have a physical location in Lake County and pay school ad valorem tax.
Okay.
Yeah, And over here, I think she's asking for more language of what a business
Ms.
is.
Turner?
right?
Yes.
Will you just be adding the language that's in the later, the one with the number of employees, and will that language just be added to this? Is that what you're saying?
So that's
It's already in here. It's
That's
on
the second page
the
of the
second
policy.
page.
Okay,
It is there.
so what does she want to add? I'm sorry,
Well,
I'm confused.
the question was what, I guess, a local business, if that was any different for business in Lake County with their number of employees or ad valorem taxes, or if those were one and the same. I guess that's the question. That is how you're defining local business. Because a local business that has one employee and pays $500 of taxes is the same as far as the definition goes as an employee that has 50 and pays $1 million. I mean,
Yes.
Okay.
And they're given points based on that.
right, okay.
Right?
And then we're proposing striking the second and third paragraph from this policy. It's just basically authorizing the board to make recommendations that they already are authorized to do. It just seemed unnecessary language, so just to tidy that up. And then finally, as far as the points system goes, we have, so this is our current policy that we just have copied from our Lake County policy. When we passed this policy, there was no discussion as to how maybe to enforce it, how to request that information from businesses. And so I worked with procurement we came up with some attempts we put into our bid documents as to how we are collecting that information so that, someone can't just say, well, I have 10 employees, that we needed some verification. So I guess if there was a discussion, if you all wanted to have about including that same kind of language in the policy, or if you just want to maybe continue having that as part of the procurement, bid documents.
Isn't that standard operating procedures for procurement? We don't necessarily have to have a policy about it, right?
It was just that this was something that was developed outside of the board because when we passed the policy, we didn't have any mechanism in place.
Correct.
So we have since developed something. We just didn't know if that was something that you all wanted to be involved in or not.
It is taking signed statements from the vendor who is attesting to and providing employment records
Right.
and their ad valorem
Correct.
to procurement.
Correct.
I do not think we need it in ours, as long as it's in
The bid
their
documents.
operating procedure.
Okay. Great.
That's just my opinion.
It's
I
fine.
mean, if we write how every department's supposed to work, it's going to be really, really big. Is Crystal there? Oh,
Yeah, I'm here.
hey, Chris. No, Chris. Crystal.
Pearson.
Mrs. Pearson,
Hi there.
are you good with it being standard operating procedure rather than a board policy?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Move on.
Okay, that's it.
Okay.
All right.
Next.
Are y'all ready to move to the next policy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The next policy is page 70, 6510 policy number, and it's payroll authorization, and it's Mr. Dodd.
All right, yes. So my question on this one, actually, I got two questions. One, it says that each motion of the board shall include, it says a few different things, and it says the effective date of employment. The documents that we're approving on I assume this is like the 9.01, 9.02 HR transactions, right? I guess I'm just wondering if we need to have the effective date of employment on there.
Hands making hand signals.
He's trying to unmute.
I would,
Oh.
Matt, should I weigh in?
Well, yeah.
Okay, I didn't. I would not recommend that. I think that that often changes from time to time. If it's just a board approval and so you're saying their start date?
Well, that's what the policy says. So I'm wondering if it needs to strike from the policy or be added to the information that we're approving. Just so it's one and the same.
I would say it needs to be stricken from the policy.
And I'm fine with that.
All right. Okay. My other question on that is, do we have any non-direct deposit paid employees?
Currently, we may have one or two, and that's just because if their banking information gets compromised, we'll switch them to a check until they can get a new account. But yes, as of the closing of the school, we have gotten basically effectively 100% participation on some
So,
type of direct deposit.
all right. So if we do have various situations that happen on a one-by-one sort of case basis, it seems based on this policy, you wouldn't be allowed to pay them because it says you got to be by direct deposit. So could there be some sort of approval from the superintendent or somebody to make that exception
Or except in extenuating circumstances.
as authorized by the superintendent?
Yeah, I would have a hard time with an auditor coming in and telling us we weren't following policy, just because it's standard business practice for employees to be able to shut off their direct deposit by a phone call or immediately because they just found out their account got compromised and they don't want their check to hit tomorrow and they lose their entire payroll. So, and they wouldn't be able to give us the direct deposit information. Now, what we would do in order to continue to follow the policy is probably by the next payroll or the following payroll, we would make sure they had the direct deposit information. What we did was we went out and we contracted with a vendor. It's a vendor that I've used in Alachua County. It's a vendor that our payroll department used when they were in Flagler County. And what that does is we can now issue any employee who loses their direct deposit, we can issue them a card temporarily until they bring their information back in. So we can almost effectively, we can't do it day to day, like do it one day and have it immediately the next. But within a week's time, we can have them actually operational again. It meets the requirement for direct deposit. So I don't think we'd have any problems at all meeting that criteria.
So like the one or two employees that you mentioned who are not receiving direct deposit, that's just a one-time sort of situation and they get the direct deposit the following check?
Yes, sir. Or they'll get the card. They'll get the card when they come in and sign the documents to stop their direct deposit. They'll get the card if they don't have their direct deposit information. And then, but if they go in and open up their bank in the next couple of weeks, they just have to come back and change it off the card back to their new banking information.
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay, are we ready for the next one? Or do we want to change something?
I just was making a note.
Okay.
All right, the next one is page 76. This is policy number 6605, which is crowdfunding, and it's Mark Dodd.
All right, let me get there just a moment. Yeah, I was trying to interpret this language. I wasn't sure if it was basically saying that like all GoFundMe requests need the approval from the superintendent.
I had that same question when we were reviewing this with Neola. They said that superintendent meant that it could be a designee, which in my opinion would be the principal of the school.
So before a teacher, let's say you teach second grade and you say, gosh, I want to get some new board games for my classroom that are ELA or math themed, and I'm going to put a GoFundMe out there. So before they go do that, they have to go to their principal and say, I want to put this GoFundMe. Can I do that? And the principal has to approve. So is that common practice? Is that required?
It's not required, it's recommended.
If we
I
put this
guess-
policy into place, is it required?
It would be, yes.
So I guess the safeguard on that is to make sure that the principal is aware what the teacher is doing, so the teacher is not taking advantage of their position to get something that will benefit them personally as opposed to not being used in the classroom.
That's true.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is a terrible idea. But it shouldn't be the approval. Should it be you? Yeah, I think we just add or designate, because I know that at one time, our Ed Foundation was doing one program, and then they were being, Around the Horn was another one. that we do need a clearinghouse for this without people just running out randomly and trying to buy whiteboards. That's just my opinion. So I think the superintendent or designee is appropriate.
We'll add it.
Right?
Okay, any other comments on that one?
Nope.
Nope.
All right, the next one is page 77, policy 6610, school internal accounts, and it's Dr. Burns.
Yeah, these had actually, at one point, it says the funds on hand should be 200, and then this funds on hand should be, or there's $1,000 spending limit for high schools. Or you have to do a full bidding process at the high schools or at any schools. And I was wondering if those values are actually quite low. Like, if a high school teacher wants to, I don't know, buy something for $2,000, they have to go get an RFP, because our high schools are big and they need big things, you know. Is 1,000 an appropriate number is like my question, and is 200 an appropriate number?
Dr. Burns, a lot of these policies that are referring to internal accounts are actually part of the Red Book, which is set up by the Department of Education. So a lot of those, and we'll go back and confirm that, we'll check the numbers, but a lot of these are almost verbatim out of the Red Book.
Okay, that's good then. Unless anyone else has a question, we can go on.
Anyone else?
Next.
Well, the thing is with the annuity is I can give her a few more days. I mean, it all expires by the end of May, but I can give her a few more days.
Okay, let's go on to the next question.
It's the Florida virtual
Okay,
that I have zero control over. Now, I will say, the district.
I don't know who's talking.
Contracted Edgenuity to do these ABC courses.
I'm not sure who's
There
talking.
is an expert.
We have no idea who this is. Who are you?
I don't know. Are we getting hacked?
Who is speaking?
I apologize. That was a Tavares High School business call going on in the background of my.
Okay, then next.
Very good.
All right, the next one is page 85, which is policy number 6670, trust and agency funds, and that's Dr. Burns.
All right, page 75, 66, 70. Okay, so I could tell this is the FSLA law. Let me actually go to it. But I could tell that it was, you know, a lot of it is what, federal law probably. I guess my question is, and I've said this, let me get to page 85. Sorry, hold on. '85, okay. Right, so, okay, so this is the sick day. It's basically like a sick day discussion. And are we stuck with this policy? Because this is sort of a typical sick day policy, and we're in untypical sick times where we want, because of COVID, we're gonna want like people to be able to, we want to make it easy for people to be sick, to have a sick day.
No idea.
So that if they have the sniffles, they can stay home.
I won't pay you
So,
you know what she's talking
Do
about.
we have to adopt this policy and then,
Ms. Burns, you're on the wrong policy, I think. We're all reading page 85 as being trust and agency fund.
okay, hold on. Page 85. Oh, this one, sorry. This one is creating a new scholarship account from what I could tell. I just wanted to know, is it creating just like a new account or a scholarship fund?
No, ma'am. We actually have trust and agency funds in our financial statement. This is just making sure that those that qualify for trust and agency funds are included in the CAPR and they are audited by our auditor.
Okay.
School
that makes
internal
sense.
accounts included.
Okay, that makes more sense. All right, so the next, am I 87? Page 87, is that the actual question I had? Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
so on page 87 was the sort of, this is like a sick leave policy. So do we have to adopt this policy, or can we, should we have a policy that is somehow easier for people to stay home, Or is that just going to be an internal policy this
So
year?
so Madam Chair, this policy is actually part of the Fair Labor Standard Act and this is not our actual employees' sick leave policy for taking off the day when they're feeling sick and stuff like that. This is more the Fair Labor Standards Act that it's more like, and Chad, you might can chime in and help me there, but I think it's the more like the medical leave act, like if they're going to be gone for a long period of time and how they can take their days off and stuff.
Oh,
So it basically, if I understand it correctly, it's basically verbatim of what the Fair Labor Standard Act requires of all this.
okay, so we can't change it.
So the policy says that we'll obey the law and not violate federal law, and then it tells us what the federal law says, pretty much.
Cool. Next.
Correct. Okay, so the next one is on page number 95. It is policy number 6840, and it's Auditor Selection Committee, and it's Christy Burns.
I figured that one out. I don't need that one.
Okay.
Oh, I do have another question in that one. I figured that out.
While you're looking for that, this is what we currently have as our audit committee charter. I don't know why it's called Auditor Selection Committee, because they don't just select an auditor, they do other stuff. So I suggested that we call it Audit Committee, which is what our current policy is called.
Agreed.
And yeah, and like one of my questions, because I was confused, was like, why was there two district appointees? And now that got explained later in the policy. But I was still confused with the experience required of the auditors. Seemed to me, and I can't remember exactly what they required, but it's in there like a line. I'll find it. And it seemed to be like a lot, like having somebody, page 95, having somebody who's involved in finance and having somebody on the committee who is a CPA seems very reasonable, but there was a section above it that had some really detailed recommendations for who the audit committee people were. And I didn't think any of our people would necessarily fill I don't know, maybe some of them do.
This is verbatim your current policy. I'm just letting you know. Nothing has changed. This is a Lake County policy.
This is a Lake County policy?
This is verbatim,
Okay.
with the exception of the title, it's verbatim the same.
Okay, well, then it works fine.
Yeah, yeah. I don't see anything wrong with it, Christie.
This is fine.
Okay.
Other than the
Now,
time.
somewhere in here, it had like,
It suggests that you have
Okay.
at least one person that's a CPA or a certified internal auditor, but it says that you should, at least one should have that, and otherwise you should strive to have a diverse background to ensure that you have multiple people.
yeah, and that seemed fine to me. I'll look if I find it. Is there anyone else? Or is that the last policy?
That was the last policy that I
Did you-
have notification for, but if someone else may have another.
Do we want to discuss that one policy with Bill?
5 minutes.
We're going to be limited on time, I think.
Oh, we are.
5 minutes.
Don't we have like 6 minutes?
Oh, I know
We have
what,
6 minutes.
excuse me.
Yeah, so
When I came
we
in,
can
I was briefed quickly by the superintendent, and I think that the fund balance should be a minimum of 4%, period.
I'm sorry,
You
what
think
was
it should be what?
We can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Now we can.
Okay. The superintendent showed me quickly the discussion that y'all had about the fund balance, and I 100%, actually, I think it should be higher than 4%, but I don't think we should deviate from 4%.
So you're saying keep it 4%, like it is current policy?
Yes, sir.
6220.
I agree with that. I think that's good advice.
You think it's what?
I think it's good advice.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, well, we'll make some changes to the language like we discussed earlier, but we'll move it from 5% to 4%.
Mr. Ward, really quickly, the very first policy, 6100, was uniform records and accounts. And there was a section in here that said that all warehouse stock shall be inventoried annually. And I asked Mr. Mock, I know that he said he hasn't done the last, I think, 2 years, so I didn't know if we wanted to put that in, strike that from policy. Is that required by statute? That they have to do inventory annually? Because I didn't look at the statute, but it just, I don't want to have it in there if it's not something we do.
It's not required by statute, but it would be considered a good business practice. And it is inventoried by the staff members that work at the warehouse, which is a standard procedure. So
Okay,
it
so
doesn't necessarily require Mr. Mock's of annual review.
Okay, so, okay, I think I was looking at audits and then inventory and put those two together, so I understand now.
Yeah, I think it's just the heading was under audits.
Right.
So
That's why I was like,
audit, so it kind of lends you to think that it's going to be audited by someone, whether it's internal audit, the external auditors, finance department. Somebody's going to be looking at the staff that's counting it for accuracy.
right.
And in the situations where if internal auditor hasn't had the opportunity to review it, when the external auditors come in to do the audit, they will, at least on a sample basis, at least review the inventory to ensure that it's actually exists. So they'll do limited procedures to make sure.
So it's fine like it is in the policy that we have.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right, I think that wraps up our policy discussion, correct, Mr. Ward?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, our board members do you want to speak or are we okay to defer comments this afternoon to this evening?
I'll defer.
Defer.
All right, okay, and superintendent?
I will defer.
All right, attorneys, anything else?
Oh, man.
All right, well then we will adjourn. Bill, if you will